enjoyed their summer, and we're ready to get the ball rolling here. So again, welcome back. So we'll start with the roll call. And Councilmember Colbert is not here. Board Chair Libby Garvey.
I'm here.
Supervisor Alcorn. You're muted.
Sorry, present.
Supervisor Sains. Okay, not here. Supervisor Franklin. Is present. Vice Mayor Bennett Parker is not present. Councilmember Duncan. I don't know. I think I might have heard. Councilmember Duncan. I don't think I hear anybody. Moving on. Councilmember Steele. You're muted. Councilmember Steele.
Here. Here.
Councilmember Davis Younger.
Present.
Councilmember Banks. Councilmember Banks.
I'm here.
Councilmember Friedrichs.
Here.
Councilmember Fox.
Here.
And Councilmember Miles is here. So next item on the agenda, I have a resolution summary to read that will need to be approved. So I will bounce into that. As a result of the COVID-19 and Governor Northam's declaration of a state of emergency, the authority's Planning Coordination Advisory Committee meeting is being held electronically. With the recent passage of the amendments to HB 29, the FOIA bill, which allows regional bodies such as the authority and their committees to conduct business meetings electronically, this evening's business meeting is being held remotely. Doing so will enable us to keep safely as a top priority while ensuring that we're adhering to social distancing requirements. Meeting by electronic means is authorized because the items on the September 23rd, 2020 agenda, committee meeting agenda, are statutorily required or necessary to continue operations of the authority. And at this time, I would ask for a motion to approve the resolution.
So moved.
Okay.
Second.
Is there a second? Who made the motion?
Suzanne Fox.
Okay, thank you. And who was the second?
I was one of them, Signe.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so we will go down the roll. We have a motion, we have a second. Is there any discussion? All right, so we'll go down the roll. Board Chair Garvey.
Aye.
Supervisor Alcorn.
Aye.
Supervisor Sains. Oh, I'm sorry, he's not here. Supervisor Franklin.
Aye.
Councilmember Steele.
Aye.
Councilmember Davis Younger.
Aye.
Councilmember Banks. Councilmember Banks, are you still with us?
Aye.
Okay. Councilmember Friedrichs.
Aye.
Councilmember Fox.
Aye.
And Councilmember Miles is the aye. That passes. And the next item on our agenda are our minutes from the June 17th meeting. There was one correction, which corrected that Councilmember Fox was in attendance for that meeting. So with that correction, do I have a motion to approve the meeting minutes from June 17th with that?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second. Libby Garvey.
Okay. So we have a motion and a second. Is there any discussion? Okay. So we're going to go down the roll again. Board Chair Garvey,
Aye.
Supervisor Acorn.
Alcorn. Aye.
Acorn, I'm sorry.
That's okay.
Supervisor Franklin,
Aye.
Councilmember Steele,
Aye.
Councilmember Davis Younger,
Aye.
Councilmember Banks, Councilmember Banks,
Aye.
Councilmember Friedrichs.
Abstain. I was not in attendance.
Okay. And Councilmember Fox.
Aye.
Okay. And Councilmember Miles is a yes, so that passes. Thank you all. The next item on our agenda is our transaction update. And at this time, I'm going to turn the floor over to Mr. Jasper for our update. Mr. Jasper, please proceed.
Thank you, Councilwoman Miles. I just want to do a sound check. Can everybody hear me okay? Good, thank you. Haroon is just putting up a presentation. I've actually got a couple of presentations we wanted to go over with you very quickly. We are in the run-up to our 5-year update of transaction, long-range transportation plan for Northern Virginia. And so increasingly, we're going to be bringing transaction-related topics to you so that you can fulfill the committee's responsibilities with respect to supporting the authority to develop this plan. And just as a reminder, I know we say it a lot, but it bears repeating. While the long-range plan is what we call fiscally unconstrained and geographically unconstrained, the authority is unable to fund any projects through its 6-year program that are not included in transaction, the long-range plan. So that is a really important thing to keep in mind as we begin the process of updating transaction. We made a presentation to the full authority at its July meeting, but I wanted to just quickly scan over the highlights of with you this evening. And this is related to the transportation impacts of the pandemic as we analyze them earlier this summer. And we will be looking to kind of drill down deeper into this analysis as we work our way through the transaction update, because like most planning entities, we're trying to figure out what it actually means for short, medium, and long-range planning. So you may have seen recently a number of organizations such as VDOT, DRPT, the Greater Washington Partnership, COG through its Commuter Connections 3-year survey, and others have posted various surveys related to how employers and employees are reacting to the pandemic. We did something slightly different. We developed 4 possible scenarios, looking at the short and the medium term. The medium term we're referring to here as the new normal. We developed these 4 scenarios so that we could attempt to understand that if these scenarios come to be, then we will understand what the impacts of these scenarios might be on Northern Virginia. And so I just quickly want to go over these scenarios, but just kind of stress that these scenarios are not predicting the future. These scenarios are what we consider to be plausible outcomes based on what assumptions we could make at the time we did the analysis. But they're not meant to be predictions, and they're certainly not preferences of what the future might look at. So the 4 scenarios, and we looked at each of these in the short term and in the new normal. A quick recovery, we show it at the top where things get back to normal, as the name implies, fairly quickly. At the bottom of the list, the cautious recovery, kind of like the other end, the other extreme. And in the middle, active transportation is a variation which recognizes the increased amount of bike and pedestrian activity that's been going on during the pandemic, primarily as a means to exercise and kind of get recreation out of doors and somewhat out of harm's way, but looking at what that effect might be if it actually becomes a preferred transportation mode. And also looking at the possibility of a second pandemic wave in October. So I won't go through all of these, but you can see a brief description for each of the scenarios in both the short term and under the new normal. Next slide, please. Behind each scenario, and now the scenarios have moved from being the rows to the columns, so you've kind of got to reorientate yourself here. So the 4 scenarios are across the top, and for each scenario, for both the short term and the new normal, we list a number of the major assumptions that we made when we did our analysis, and obviously telework is an important one of those. And you see that for telework, we show under all these scenarios in the new normal between 10 and 15% telework more telework compared to the pre-pandemic levels. So what I would consider to be a relatively modest increase in telework as things finally settle down. And then various assumptions for job loss, school attendance. I would say that at the time we developed the assumptions, school attendance was a subject of great debate among your jurisdiction's respective school boards. At the time, there was a hybrid option and a fully virtual option. But as things have turned out, everyone has pretty much gone to fully virtual for at least the start of this semester. Perceptions about transit safety was factored in. Again, some assumptions about active transportation. So these are the underlying assumptions to the analysis that we did. Next slide, please. So just turning quickly to short-term impacts, and I'll just skim over these. These are looking out to 2021, mostly towards the middle of next year when the assumptions kind of bring us to a relative new equilibrium. And for example, here, looking at vehicle miles traveled, we see that all 4 scenarios recover to a level which is somewhat below the baseline that we would expect to see, but they all recover at different rates based on various assumptions. Next slide. You can go to the next slide after this one. Actually, skip over the sub areas. Okay, so impact on vehicle speed. Yeah, just go back one. So vehicle speeds are obviously higher than the pre-pandemic baseline, and generally staying higher, although reverting back to something closer to it as time goes by. Next slide. Transit ridership hit pretty hard. Recovering, again, not recovering to the baseline level. And in the case of cautious recovery, still quite a way below the baseline, but some recovery. So person hours of delay kind of reflects congestion reflects increased vehicle speeds with lesser amounts of delay. Next slide. So then turning to the new normal impact. So let's just looking a little bit further out to 2025. Next slide, please. So what we did here was slightly different methodology. We looked at we used the model that we developed for the current version of transaction that was adopted back in 2017. And we used that model to test the scenarios using the same performance measures that we use previously on transaction. So this is kind of repeating previous analysis, but looking at some different assumptions. Next slide. So I just to dwell on this slide for a moment. You see in the four rightmost columns each of the four scenarios, and then on the left you see a series of measures, and in the next column the base 2025 conditions. And really just want you to focus on the blue arrows that are listed under the four scenarios, representing the biggest variation for each of the measures that we looked at. And you do see by and large, the cautious recovery scenario has the biggest change from the baseline conditions. So I'm going to dwell on that to just kind of walk you through this. So for both auto trips and transit trips, respectively, we see 38% and 37% reduction in trips. What this really indicates is that the effects of the pandemic and the assumptions that we're making affect the modes broadly in the same measure. But as you look down to the two rows which are highlighted slightly in green, you see the hours of travel for the cautious recovery is showing a 55% reduction and an 85% reduction in delay. And this arising from 38% reduction in auto trips and 38% reduction in miles of travel. So you can see the impact on congestion is much greater than the actual change in travel behaviour. But with with transit losing 37% of transit trips, you see the very bottom right hand corner. For the cautious recovery, transit crowding is reduced by 66%. I mean, effectively, it's largely eliminated. Next slide, please. So I'm going to skip over these. These slides we'll send them out to you after the meeting, so you can peruse some of these other graphics in more detail later. But I just wanted to get to a couple of recommendations, or a couple of summary slides at the end. So pause here. So for the new normal scenario observations, and I'm focusing a bit more on this since MBTA is a planning and programming body. The short-term implications, while important for agencies that are involved in operations, have less focus for MBTA because MBTA does not operate transportation systems, but we're obviously much more involved with the planning. So in looking at the new normal, all four scenarios assume 10 to 15% more telework than pre-COVID levels, but also assume that school attendance levels will be close to pre-COVID levels. All four scenarios are reducing auto and transit trips, and all four scenarios are reducing persons' hours of delay. And obviously there's variations between the scenarios, and when we look at major travel corridors, that impact is very evident in travel metrics. Next slide. So in conclusion, certainly as far as the short term, the majority of changes are occurring within the first 18 months and level off in the middle part of next year. I would say one of the factors which is driving that is the assumptions that were made about the rollout of vaccination programs, which essentially considered that a vaccine would be available by the end of this year and will be substantially available by the middle of next year. That's the assumption that was made. For the new normal, teleworking and economic impact results in travel volumes and ridership that do not fully recover to pre-COVID levels. We see significant reductions in time spent traveling and time lost in congestion. And while those impacts are welcome and positive, what we also see is that transit ridership reduction at the levels that we're seeing may well be challenging to the financial stability of some transit agencies. And I'm sure you've all heard what Marta recently, which is concerned that $2 million a day it's losing, and expects the federal support revenues to be exhausted by about the end of this calendar year. So, there's maybe a silver lining. That sounds the wrong expression under these circumstances, but certainly some potential ongoing problems as well. So I think I'll pause here for this presentation. The actual slide deck itself has got nearly 50 slides in it, so I didn't want to go through all of those, but we will share them with you so that you can review them, and we'd be more than happy to follow up if you have any questions. So I'll pause there if there's any comments, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Jasper. We certainly appreciate all the hard work that the staff continues to provide to MVCA and also to our committee. I do not see anyone who has indicated any questions by raising their hand. At this point, I'll ask the committee if you have any questions, please. Either raise your hand or you could indicate that in the chat box. Are there any questions at this time?
Madam Chair, I'm sorry I don't have the ability to do the hand, or I'm having technical difficulties. It's Libby Garvey. I'm just here by phone. Is that all right?
Hi, Chair Garvey. How are you?
I'm doing all right. My computer just decided it doesn't have a microphone anymore. So
okay, well, please proceed.
No question. And I can't see the slides real clearly. So one of the questions is, would staff like to address a little bit where they think we'll be in? Is there some thinking where we're going to be like in 5 years from now? Because we are a long-term agency, right? So I just wonder so we're looking out short term. It's looking, pretty grim for moving around and travel, but probably in 5 years, what are they thinking? So is that sorry if that's a off the wall question, but that's what I find myself wondering.
Yes, that's a very, very good question. And if I honestly knew the answer to it, I'd be very happy and probably very wealthy as well. The honest answer is it's too early to know. It's a situation which is frankly unprecedented and still playing out. So what I can tell you is that the kind of the next phase to what we're doing here, and this will continue as we develop transaction over the next couple of years, is we're paying close attention to those surveys I mentioned when I began speaking. I don't have all the information in front of me right now, but pretty much across the board, every survey that we're seeing is saying that post-pandemic work from home arrangements will continue at a higher level than they were prior to the pandemic. So that is one thing that is going to change. Now, to what extent, we don't know, but the very conservative assumptions we made, and by conservative I mean very modest assumptions we made of telework at a 10 to 15% higher level is actually lower than what we're hearing and reading through some of those initial surveys, what employers in the region and indeed employees in the region are telling us. So I think to that extent that is going to probably have some bearing on how things will look in 2025. Actually, from an economic standpoint, that's much harder to know. Some businesses are really struggling. Other businesses are seeing opportunity, and to the extent that one cancels the other out, again, it's too soon to know. And even then, it's too soon to know how that will affect trip making. So, for example, one of the things we've been looking at is, very, very dramatic changes in the nature of online shopping, curbside pickup, home delivery. That's kind of almost appears, at least anecdotally, to be a step change in how things looked just a year ago. So, that again could have a big bearing on travel behaviours in 2025 if that continues as a trend. And the reason why we think these things might continue as a trend is because, unlike a winter storm or a hurricane or some other short-lived natural or or human-caused disaster. This has been going on for 6 months. Most of those other things that cause disruption generally last maybe a few days, a few weeks, at the extreme, a few months, but in a very localized way. But here we're seeing something which is actually causing businesses and individuals to change the way they live. And so that's why we think that there might be some long-lasting effect here. It's a very long answer to a very good question, but I hope that covers it.
No, that does help. I mean, I found it interesting that a number of large projects, including Amazon, which of course is doing well in the pandemic, they're continuing on. There was at first a little pullback and hesitation, and suddenly what the projects that were being built and stuff are kind of proceeding on with an assumption that things are going to be not back to normal, I don't think, but this will continue to be an attractive area to be. And so one of the interesting things will be, will we continue to have the growth in population, which we were going to have difficulty handling anyway? And it could be we get the growth in population because this continues to be a good place to live, work, and play, as we say, but that more people will be doing, the teleworking and doing things differently. But yet, with the increased population, transportation is still going to need to happen. And maybe it actually will be that may be a silver lining to the whole thing, that more people will be able to telework, and the system that we've got will be able to handle better what we have, but still be pretty full. So that's my Pollyanna view. But obviously none of us know. And Jasper, thank you so much for that. Thank you.
All right, thank you so much. Are there any further questions for Mr. Jasper? Okay, seeing none, we'll go ahead and move on. And our next item on the agenda is an MBTA update from Ms. Bagman. So at this point, I am going to turn the floor over to Ms. Bagman. Welcome. It's good to see you again.
Thank you, everyone. It's good to see everyone. I hope everyone is doing well. I will be brief in that the authority, we're monitoring the special session, if you will, the General Assembly session. Of course, everyone is watching and waiting to find out when will the budget be released. One thing we've noted and working with our legislative liaisons, McGuire and Woods, it seems that this is going to be one long session, and they will probably end sometime towards the end of this month, which is ideal, or I should say optimistic. And we're looking at October, which really is going to mean they're running into the start of the 2021 session. The authority, their governance and personnel committee, is meeting October the 8th prior to the start of the regularly scheduled authority meeting, because we're trying to prepare to have our legislative program drafted and the ask, if you will, of the General Assembly. Now, one of the questions I get asked a lot is, well, what is the authority going to ask for? For the past few years, we're still talking about restoration. I know I've received some questions, hey, even in this climate, will the authority ask for restoration? Yes, we will probably still ask for restoration because we don't want this to fall off of anyone's radar. Just as a reminder, as part of the 2018 WMATA legislation, the $154 million that WMATA received, which was Virginia's share of the $500 million, 102 of that came from MBTA. So since then, we've been working to get a lot of that money back. I will say, as part of the omnibus bill, we were really at $50 million. Now there are some delays, and we are evaluating the I-81 revenues because there was a concern, and that was from the 2019 session. We weren't achieving what we were told we would achieve, and that was going to be a phased approach for fiscal years 2021, and by 2022 we were supposed to have 20 million, but even what we were supposed to receive for fiscal years 20 and 21, we're nowhere near that number. So that's a long way of saying we're monitoring, we're following, we're in conversations with the Commonwealth. Right now, they can't tell us too much until the budget is adopted, but we will have the restoration of MBTA as a top legislative priority this year as well. I want to pause there to see if anyone has any questions about the General Assembly and the authority's position.
Monica, there's a question from
Ms. Bagman?
Councilmember Still.
I'm sorry, Councilwoman Miles.
Yes, there is a question in the chat box from Councilmember Steele. Councilmember Steele, would you like to go ahead and ask that?
Be happy to. Just really looking, Monica, for anything we need to do, either for the General Assembly, or do you have all the authority to do blended meetings in the future? I know it's been great to be able to hop on, even if you don't have to travel everywhere. And is there anything we need to tee up to make that a reality?
Well, it's
Thank you,
interesting that you asked that, because right now, since we're still under the governor's order, even though we're technically in phase 3, we still have the ability to hold these electronic meetings until the governor really lifts that, the declaration of the state of emergency. Will he do that, or when will that happen? We don't know. We were hearing things that initially it was going to be the fall, but then there was concern about the wave of increases that we were seeing here in Virginia. So right now, we just don't know. Moving to other authority topics, I just wanted to note, like I stated earlier, the authority is meeting on October the 8th. We anticipate getting an update from the OIP, what is called OIPs, the Office of Intermodal Planning at the Commonwealth, and it's in regards to their VTrans, which is the Commonwealth's long-range transportation plan. This is important because VTrans is just as we use transaction as the guide for funding decisions. The Commonwealth uses VTrans. So they are making some changes to VTrans. We're trying to stay on top of that, because one thing that HB 2313 says, and that's our funding bill, and I am paraphrasing, but essentially just because MBTA has this funding, the Commonwealth isn't absolved of their transportation funding responsibilities to Northern Virginia. So we are monitoring that. Getting back to the legislation briefly, I did want to note one thing in regards to the revenue sharing program. Because of the deficit that the Commonwealth is experiencing, they are looking at the revenue sharing program, not to cancel any projects, but if projects are being funded with revenue sharing dollars, but the projects aren't ready, the funding may be used for something else until these projects are more advanced. But I do want to note, they're saying they are not canceling any revenue sharing projects, but they want to free up some money on the front end for projects that are not ready to advance with the revenue sharing dollars. What I have asked Deputy Secretary Donahue and Deputy Secretary John Lawson to send me a list of those projects that they've targeted in Northern Virginia that aren't moving, that are really that they think that are on schedule to use the funds in the out years, so we can talk to our localities, because in VTA we do have some funding on projects that are using revenue sharing as the match. And that's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Backman. Are there any other questions for Ms. Backman? Okay. At this time, I am going to recognize Mr. Jasper, who does have some additional information that he would like to share with the committee. Mr. Jasper?
Thank you, Councilwoman Miles. I just wanted to briefly touch on one other aspect of transaction, and that is the vision and goals that are associated with the long-range plan. Haroon, I have a second presentation. Yes, thank you. Just loading this up. So by way of background, the vision and goals really, at a 30,000-foot level, drive transaction. And the vision and goals that we use for transaction have broadly been the same over multiple iterations. But it is appropriate at each cycle, and this is a 5-year cycle for the long-range plan, that we revisit the vision and goals and just reaffirm that they are the goals that we want to proceed with. So I just wanted to quickly take the opportunity to share with you this evening a little bit of information. At some point in the next month or two, we would like some feedback from committee members on how they feel about vision and goals, with a view to hopefully going to the authority at its December meeting to ask the authority to approve either the current vision and goals or revised goals. So I've got a very short presentation here that we'll just walk you through this. If you could go to the next slide, please, Haroon. As you go to the next slide after this. So the current vision and goals on the left, you see the vision statement. It's 2 sentences long, but actually runs to 2 paragraphs, as you can see. The vision statement itself, which is obviously very lofty and aspirational, is supported by 3 goals, which you can see in the left column of the table. And then each goal has a series of objectives and performance measures associated with them. There are 15 performance measures in total, and each performance measure is weighted by either 5 or 10%. There are 10 measures with a weight of 5% and 5 measures with a weight of 10% to add up to 100%. 7 of the 15 measures are measures that we've used as part of a required process as specified in Virginia Code, what we often refer to as the HB or House Bill 599 rating process dating back to 2012 session. And we are required to do an analysis. And so 7 of these 15 measures actually have been used previously for that HB 599 rating process. One of the concerns that we have with, not so much with the vision, but with the measures, is that there are 15 of them. It's an attempt to kind of cover everything that's important, but in so doing, as you can tell by the weightings, everything kind of gets diluted down to a very low level, which essentially means that it's hard to really infer what the priorities are, because everything seems to be a priority. So that's one of the things we've taken the opportunity to look at. But at this stage, I would stress the only thing we're going to take to the authority this year will be vision and goals. And so any discussion about objectives and measures and weights associated with measures is purely illustrative only at this stage. We're not looking for any decision making or guidance related to measures right now, but we did want to demonstrate that it was feasible to we could map a way to use these measures even if we change the vision and goals a little. So next slide, please. So we are proposing, for discussion purposes, a revised vision statement. There's a very long drum roll going on here while this loads. Haroon, is this stalled? There it is. Okay, so the proposed vision statement is that Northern Virginia will plan for and invest in a sustainable and integrated multimodal transportation system that enhances quality of life, strengthens the economy, and builds resilience. This is actually very similar to the first sentence of that 2-sentence vision statement I showed on an earlier slide. And if you could advance to the next slide, please. The way we would look to kind of map the vision to goals and objectives would be that we would still have 3 goals: 1 addressing mobility, 1 addressing accessibility, and 1 addressing resiliency. And that ties in with the 3 components of the vision, where it states that enhances quality of life is the mobility goal, strengthens the economy is the accessibility goal, and builds resilience is the resiliency goal. And then with those 3 goals, we could have objectives and measures that are summarized in the right-hand column, as shown on the screen, with 3 measures covering crowding and congestion, 1 measure covering travel time and reliability, a couple of measures addressing accessibility, and a couple of measures related to resiliency, which kind of brings in an environmental component, and also what you see there is a homeland security component. Homeland security is there because that HB 599 legislation I referred to earlier from 2012, that part of the Virginia Code does require that analysis to consider homeland security. So there is a legal mandate to have something within our measures that addresses homeland security. Next slide, please. So just putting a little bit more kind of detail here. The goals are not fully stated, but just kind of repeated in the left column. The objectives are expanded slightly, so you can see, we're talking about reduced roadway congestion, reduced transit crowding, improved travel time reliability, etc. And then to the right, there's a column of measures, and there are 8 measures listed here of the original 15. And the other 7 measures are listed in that right-hand column, so that we can account for them and possibly adjust, to move some back in, to delete them, whatever. As I said earlier, we're not looking to kind of get much feedback on objectives and measures right now, but we just wanted to show you how they map back to the goals and the goals map back to the vision. So is there one more slide? Yeah. So there's one more slide. So one of the things that the vision, the goals, objectives, measures, etc., do not take account of is equity. To my knowledge, equity is not something that's really manifested itself in any previous iteration of MBTA's vision and goals, etc. At least if it has, it's not explicit. The transportation industry as a whole recognizes the importance of equity, and we are doing quite a bit of research ourselves to try and understand how it makes sense for the authority to address equity. And one way that we've considered doing this is, rather than trying to force it into a structure of goals and objectives and measures where it doesn't naturally find a home, is to do what we've called here is create a core value for equity, and possibly other measures as well, whereby instead of kind of putting it into a numerical formula, we adopt an approach where whatever it is transaction concludes, we take a more of a holistic view at how projects that are in transaction address equity at a broader regional level rather than necessarily at an individual project level, although it could break down to different types of projects or different types of projects in different part of the region. We don't yet know how that's going to work. I'll be perfectly honest with you, because as I say, it's not something we've done before. But so this is all I've got in this presentation. Again, we'll share this with you after this meeting. We would like to revisit this at a future meeting to get your considered feedback. So not really wanting to put you on the spot with anything right now. We didn't share this presentation in advance because we wanted to actually walk you through it rather than just hit you with it cold and it not really come across in a meaningful way. So again, with that, I'll pause. If there's any immediate questions or comments, I'll be happy to try and answer. But if not, we'll revisit this topic at a subsequent meeting or possibly two. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Jasper. Are there any members of the committee that have any questions about the presentation? Okay. All right, seeing no questions, I do want to thank you for that presentation. I personally, I appreciate the introduction of equity into core values. And I like that you said that we're not there yet, but you know that you want to introduce the concept so that we can have a bigger conversation about that later. So personally, I do want to thank NVCA for that. I think that is a big part of what I'm committed to personally. And I do want to thank you for your work there. Does anyone have any questions in general for the staff?
This is Signe, I do.
Okay, thank you.
So all of these 3 presentations, more or less, have raised one question in my mind. Well, actually, a couple of questions. And I want to thank you guys for just presenting this really beautifully, because the question that comes to my mind is we are forcibly decongesting basically all of our transit systems in the Northern Virginia and probably in the entire country. Where is that sustainable and desirable? And how long can we last at the level that, I mean, you said that that by the end of the fiscal year, or the calendar year, we would run out of funding. But knowing that a goal of ours is always less congestion while keeping things fiscally sound, is a 5% loss of ridership a good thing, or is no loss of ridership acceptable financially and logistically?
Yes, if I may respond, that is, I mean, what we're seeing, you're quite right, is something that's, it's what I refer to as an external factor. It's not something any of us really have any control over, but it's something we have to deal with. And from MBTA's point of view, deal with its transportation impacts. Just to be clear on the statement I made earlier, Metro is saying that they're losing $2 million a day, and the federal support revenues will basically be exhausted by the end of the year. So that's not MBTA's money that's, being affected that way. We are being affected in our revenue streams, but we're not losing money or running out of money at the end of the year. Just to be clear on that. But to your broader point about how this affects transit going forward, I think one of the problems perhaps right now is that most transit agencies stopped collecting fares as part of the pandemic response in order to facilitate safety, both real and perceived, in terms of how people circulate through vehicles and touching money changing hands or smart trip cards being pressed on the equipment. This is on buses. Obviously, losing the revenue is a serious impact. That revenue has got to be made up in some way. Otherwise, it's just adding to the deficits that are being experienced. Ms. Backman sent me a clipping of a story from, I think it was Arizona, where they're looking to perhaps make their all transit vehicles free going forward as a policy approach, and that's certainly a policy approach that this region could consider, but it kind of conflicts with the issue about financial sustainability as well, though. So, it's part of a much broader pattern that's got to be addressed. And I think if I were to take a step back and take a really big picture look at this, it kind of begs the question: well, is there a different model for providing transit? I'm not saying there is or there isn't, but at times of profound change, it may be appropriate to have a profound rethink as well. And so for us, as we go through our transaction process, there may be some different scenarios that we can look at and model to some extent to try and understand where there are different approaches that both meet the mobility and accessibility needs of the region, as well as the resiliency needs of the region, capture the congestion impacts, which by and large are positive, without sacrificing transit service on a long-term basis. So again, I'll be perfectly blunt. I don't have the answer to your question, but I think it's a perfectly valid question to be asked and addressed as we go through the transaction update process.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Councilmember Friedrichs. Are there any other questions? Okay, seeing none. That was the last item on our agenda. Do I have a motion to adjourn?
So moved. This is Councilmember Friedrichs.
Okay. Is there a second?
Second, Councilwoman Davis Younger.
Okay, thank you. So I'm going to go down the roll very quickly. Chair Garvey. Supervisor Osborne.
Aye.
Supervisor Franklin.
Aye.
Councilmember Duncan. Councilmember Steele.
Aye.
Councilmember Davis Younger.
Aye.
Councilmember Banks.
Aye.
Councilmember Friedrich.
Aye.
Councilmember Fox.
Aye.
And Councilmember Miles is a yes. That passes. Our next meeting will be on October 28th. It's been a pleasure to see everyone here, and I look forward to seeing you at our next meeting. Thank you for joining.